أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We start by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, thanking Him for His immense bounties upon us, the blessing of health, the blessing of mind, the ability to gather here on this day for His sake and His sake alone. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to shower His peace, blessings and mercy upon the final messenger, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, upon his household, his companions, and those that follow him until the final day. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those. Ameen. Before we talk about, and we continue talking about the story of Al-Andalus, I thought we'd do two things. One is actually just a comment that was shared to me and I thought I'd share with you. And it's the interesting story of, I believe it was Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. When he would pray, when he was in Salat, he would actually read Surah Al-Fatiha very slowly. So he would read one verse and stay quiet for some time, and then read the next verse and stay quiet for some time. And so at one point in time he was asked, why do you do this? O Khalifa, O Amir al-Mu'mineen, why do you do this? And he answered, the meaning of which, I'm enjoying the response of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because he believed, and it's narrated, that the Prophet ﷺ narrated this, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds to the verses of the Quran as they are recited. So when you say, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, my servant has praised me. And so forth. Likewise, the comment that was shared with me was that whenever the Quran is recited, you can do more than just reflect on the verses. You can actually interact with it. So whenever hellfire is mentioned, you can say, A'udhu Billah. You can make this dua, constant dua while the Quran is being recited. You say, Oh Allah, forsake us from it. And whenever a Jannah is mentioned, you can say, Oh Allah, make us among those that enter the Jannah. And whenever any pearl of wisdom is shared, you can say, Oh Allah, make us benefit from this in this world so that we may attain the Jannah in the hereafter. And so on and so forth. And so I just felt that the opportunity of having Brother Abdul Kareem recite with us these verses, these beautiful verses, gives us that opportunity to make this dua as he is reciting. The second thing I'd like to do actually is kind of ask you what you think about this image. I mean, we've shared this picture for quite some time now. Today's the fourth session. And I want to hear from you actually, what do you think this represents and what does it mean to you? And why this image, why the features in it, what does it mean to anyone? And I'd like to see if people would venture out for that. It's been up there for quite a few minutes. If you look at it and think about it, what does it mean to you? Any thoughts? Any brother or sister brave enough to venture out? Any thought? Any comment? Yes, ma'am.
What we've lost.
What we've lost. What we've lost. Jazakallah khair. Any other comments? Sisters? Brothers? First of all, do you know what this is? No? Close? It's in Al-Andalus. It's not Qurtuba though. No one? Hiba? Al-Hamra Palace. Okay, yes. So it's the Al-Hamra Castle or Palace in Al-Andalus. Now what does it represent? What does this image represent? Yes? Civilization. Civilization. Jazakallah khair. Any other comments? Art. The beautiful architecture of the building. Jazakallah khair. Any other thought?
bastion of power of Islam is Ottoman Empire there. The bastion of the empire.
The Muslim Empire in Spain?
The bastion of the empire, of the Ottoman Empire.
Mm-hmm. Jazakallah khair. What else?
Serenity of the place.
The serenity of the place.
It's beside the mountain.
Yes. Jazakallah khair. The serenity of the place. And really that's what it is. It's a beautiful image. It shows the greenery, the mountain, the clear sky, and you see this building beautifully built with such architecture. And it really, if you focus on the image, it really is an interesting one, because the crescent over there kind of is also interesting. And so really the series is about this really. It's about looking at this image. It's about looking at what happened in Al-Andalus. It's about understanding how this castle got built and how it's no longer being used right now, and it's only what it is. It's just archaeology. It's just history that is looked at through different lens. And so our lens, inshallah, that we're looking through, not the glasses, but the lens in general is one from an Islamic perspective, inshallah. So I just thought I'd share this with you before we go into talking about Al-Andalus. Today's title is The Enterer. The Enterer. And so we'll answer that question. Who or what is the Enterer? And what and where did he enter? The agenda, inshallah, for today is we'll have a quick review. We will talk about the Andalusians. We will talk about what happened after Balat al-Shuhada. What was Balat al-Shuhada? What was it about? We touched about Balat al-Shuhada last time. We talked about the story. But we'll briefly summarize it again here, and we'll talk about what happened after that. And then we'll talk about the era of governors 2. So last time we talked about the era of governors 1. We'll talk about the era of governors part 2. And then we'll talk about the Enterer for the most part, inshallah. The last chapter is the attempt of the Abbasids. The Khilafah al-Abbasiyya, they had an attempt to do something. We'll talk about that as well. So a quick review. Why talk about history to begin with? I like to start with this question because it's very important to put us in perspective. Every time I'm here, I like to ask this question, but this time I won't open the floor. I'll just give you the answer. One of the few answers that we had. And is that the rules of success and failure are the same. The rules of success and failure are the same. The sunnah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed in this world, in this life, are the same. If you adopt the rules of success, you're bound to succeed. And if you adopt or fall into the traps or mistakes of failure, you're bound to fail. And so if we learn from these rules of success, if we try to deduce these rules by studying history in general, then inshallah you can avoid the mistakes, the pitfalls of the past, and you can learn how to make use of the rules of success so that you can be successful, inshallah. In this history specifically, we see the coward, we see the brave, we see the treacherous, the honest, the scholar, the jurist. We see all types of people, the just ruler, the corrupt ruler, the person that's sincere, the person that's insincere. We see the mujahid. These are examples of people that have lived in the past. And we need to see these examples to learn again from them. What good did they do that we can adopt, that we can perhaps model ourselves after, to consider them our role models? What evil happened that we can avoid and not fall into again? These are the primary two reasons for looking at history. And we talked about a verse as well. And the verse was, and narrate the stories. And narrate the stories. Why? Why do we narrate the stories? So that we may reflect. That's the verse in the Quran that talks about history. The stories that are narrated not to lament them, not to cry over spilt milk, but they are there so that we can reflect upon them and learn from them, inshallah. Alright, all of Al-Andalus What happened there? There was a part that was not opened to Islam. So Islam entered Al-Andalus. We talked about this. Tariq ibn Ziyad led the first army into Al-Andalus from Morocco. And he entered and he ruled, and then Musa ibn Hussein came and helped him, and they together were able to open all of Al-Andalus except for Pelona. It was left unopened, and we'll see the map and picture of Pelona and how it is, and what that area represents. It's a very important thing, because that area, that region that was unopened to Islam, will be one of the reasons and one of the, let's say, loopholes that will be used against the Muslims in Spain, in Al-Andalus. It was neglected by the Muslims, unfortunately. They said it only has 30 or 40 non-Muslim people that have just fled there and they're trying to live there, so it doesn't really matter. It's not really important. That was a mistake. It became the nucleus of the Christian rebellion that led to the fall of Al-Andalus many years later. And we'll talk about that, inshallah, in sessions to come. Perhaps briefly today, inshallah, as well. Another question. Mosques. Did the Muslims build any mosques in Al-Andalus? Were any mosques actually built? And yes, there was a mosque that was built in Al-Andalus. And the first mosque was built in this city, Zaragoza. In this city, we'll see also a picture of, inshallah. They would buy churches, and they would convert these churches into mosques upon purchase. But they would never actually force any church to be purchased. They would never, force anyone not to have their church. They would actually allow them to have the churches, and they actually did have many churches. And they would actually pay overprice. They would overprice it and overpay it, much higher than the actual value for that church when they would actually buy it. What else? Why 20 governors and 22 governments? And we talked about this, right? Why 20 governors and 22 governments? So, we mentioned that the governors, after the ruling, when Al-Andalus was open, we said that there were two eras. The first era and the second era. And all in all, there were 22 governments, 20 governors, meaning two of them actually ruled twice. And so these governments were shifting, and if you notice how long this was, let's see if the number of years is there. Well, many of the governors were martyred in the battles in France, one of the reasons why. And during the second part of this era, governors were plotted against and ousted and killed. And so the first part is known as a period of jihad, and the second part was a period of corruption. We'll talk about the period of corruption briefly today. But very interestingly, how many of the governors were martyred in battles in France. That means that the jihad was going all the way to France. And that jihad was not led by armies with the leader or the ruler, kind of separate from them. No, they were actually leading the armies. They were at the forefront of the battle. And this actually had them, many of them, martyred during these battles. We'll actually see the period of time that this took. This is an interesting question. And what is done in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala must be pure so as to be successful. That's a rule. And it's a lesson that we learn from Salat al-Shuhada. I thought I'd show the answer for the question here. And examples of this happening is terrorism. And you would ask the question, is it something that is done in the name of Allah? It is something that's done in the name of Allah. But is it pure? It's not. And there are rules of engagement that have not been adopted here. And we'll talk about the rules of engagement that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained and that the Prophet ﷺ has ordained. And you will see how the Muslims adopted it. Inshallah. What about suicide bombing? A dear brother once said, when the question of suicide bombing is ever asked, I would say, I don't know. I'm not in their situation. I haven't suffered for decades under tyranny. And I don't know how to respond to it. Perhaps if I've lived there for a few years, I would understand. But I don't. And I cannot condemn it, nor can I condone it. So these were the statements of the brother. I'll not mention his name, and he was talking specifically about the Palestinian plight. And so it's a question. Whether you agree or disagree, the question is, are the motives pure? Are the means pure? Are the efforts pure? Are they all done within the boundaries that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordained and given us? If it's not, it will never be successful. Chapter 1. The Andalusians are those that lived in Al-Andalus. And the question that is posed, and Dr. Raghib al-Sujani asked this question, he says, why didn't they rebel? Why didn't they rebel? Why don't we hear about these rebellions happening in Al-Andalus? I mean, the rebellions were not actually happening in Al-Andalus for the most part. They were happening from outside Al-Andalus. But in Al-Andalus, not much rebellion happened. Why? Why not rebel? Tariq ibn Ziyad had 12,000 troops. Right? If you break them down, at Barbeg he lost 3,000. That was the first battle in Al-Andalus. And to Toledo, he reached there only with 3,000. And then he was supported with Musa ibn Nusayr, who brought 18,000 troops. And at the end, this number is a small number to lead all of Al-Andalus. Why not rebel? And Dr. Raghib al-Sujani, kind of rephrases the question. He says, why rebel? Why rebel? The Andalusians found something interesting in Islam, but they were living in poverty, in ignorance. They were living under persecution. And theft was normal, transgression was normal, intolerance was normal. And we talked about the history of the Christians in Al-Andalus. You can refer to them, inshallah, on YouTube and on the website, automakif.ca/campus. There, you can see all those videos, inshallah, where we talk in detail about how Al-Andalus was before Islam. But there was a huge rift between rulers and the populace. Huge rift. The rulers were getting richer and richer, and the people were getting poorer and poorer. And if you remember the image I tried to give you, which is very common for those that are familiar with Western culture, is that of Robin Hood, the story of Robin Hood and the Sheriff of Nottingham. And you hear about you see the sheriff going to these poor people, taking their money, saying that it's taxes, and giving it to the wealthy rulers of the time. And then Robin Hood comes and steals from the rich and gives back to the poor and all. But the idea is there, and it actually is true. That's how it was. The rulers would actually do this. They would apply these taxes that are huge and take all the wealth that are actually earned by the people and put it in their pockets, and they would be richer and richer. So why rebel? The question is an interesting one. Why would they rebel? Would they rebel for those that persecuted them? The same rulers that were causing this persecution. Why would they rebel to bring them back? They have memories of grief, hunger, and injustice. And here, Dr. Raghib al-Sujani says that citizenship is about your memories in the country that you're in. So if you've lived in a country for some time, you have memories of that country. And if they're joyous memories, you love that country. Even if you go through hardships, you have family, you have friends, you have relationships, you enjoy the area, you enjoy life. If you live under grief and hunger and poverty and injustice, then you can't be expected to have any citizenship. And so these individuals had no citizenship at all. The Andalusians. They didn't believe in their rulers. They loved their land. They wanted to live there in peace and harmony. But that was something that they were deprived of. The alternative was brought in by Islam. Justice is not a gift. It is a right. This is something that Islam brought forth. This is something that is new to the people. No more discrimination. Ruler is just like anyone else. A worker, a peasant. They're all equal in the sight of the law, in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tolerance. You can, actively live your own life. You can be of a different religion. You can have your own way of thinking. You'll be tolerated. Religious accommodation. A term that is coined recently, a term that we enjoy, alhamdulillah, here today, and we consider our right, but it existed back then in Al-Andalus. And it was given. It was not a gift. It was a right for the people. Is it possible that everyone is happy? No. No. There were two factors here that Dr. Raghib al-Sajjani focuses on, and he says that it was fear and awe. Fear and awe. So this was primarily in those that actually wanted to fight against the Muslims. They had fear because they felt that these Muslims were actually gaining the support of the population. And so it wasn't just the 18,000 troops or so that were there. No, it was actually supported by the population. And they were at awe at how this new system was being implemented. They were so much intrigued by it. This is a very interesting verse in the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَأَنْتُمْ أَشَدُّ رَهْبَةً فِي صُدُورِهِم مِّنَ اللَّهِ ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ قَوْمٌ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ. Meaning, you believers are more fearful within their chests and hearts, and they more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is because they are people that do not understand. They do not fear Allah, they feared the people. They feared the Muslims that were ruling. This is where we talked about the rules of engagement. This is a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he says, fight in the name of Allah, for the sake of Allah, not for the sake of wealth, not for the sake of power, not for the sake of anything else except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. To kill those that disbelieve in Allah, that do not transgress. Keyword here is, do not transgress. Meaning, fight those that disbelieve in Allah and fight you, but never transgress. Do not betray any treaties. Do not mutilate. Do not kill children, old men, or women. Narrated in Sahih Muslim. And these are very interesting guidelines for the rules of engagement, as narrated by the Prophet ﷺ, as ordained by Islam. This is the region that was left. Remember we said Kelowna was left? At the bottom of that ellipse over there, you'll see some mountainous region, known as the rock or the mountain of Kelowna. Muslims ruled all of this area. And so the Andalusians were living in Islam. And again, is it possible that everyone is happy? No. There were pockets of greed. People that were greedy, that wanted the wealth to be accumulated for themselves. They did not want to share this with the peasants. They felt that the peasants were beneath it. The people that were actually working, the working class, didn't get any of the wealth before the Muslims came in. And so there were pockets of greed. And evil will always persist and always exist. And this is a quote by Dr. Raghib al-Sajjani in a different book, where he says, talking actually about the message of reform brought forth by the Prophet ﷺ, that true messages of reform must be attacked, should be attacked, by those that wish corruption to spread. And the war between truth and falsehood is a continuous war till the final day. And so sometimes we don't like this rule or sunnah of life. We don't like it. We say, why do they attack us? Why smear Islam in the media? Why do this? Why do that? Why send troops to Iraq or Afghanistan? Why do these evil things to us? We're a peaceful people. All we want is peace. This is one. This is one. It's a sunnah of life. That greed and corruption and those that want for it to spread will always attack Islam and will always attack true messages of reform. In fact, it is considered a true indication of one's efforts in spreading this message if he or she is attacked. If he or she is attacked. Well-known du'at would actually say this. They would say that if everything is fine and dandy, and no one is actually attacking me, and no one is attacking this message, then we're doing something wrong. And we are doing something wrong. Chapter 2, Balat al-Shuhada. After Balat al-Shuhada. Balat al-Shuhada means the courtyard of the martyrs. The courtyard of the martyrs. And we talked about Balat al-Shuhada last time, but we'll touch upon it again here. These were people that were tabi'een. Tabi'een. And we always hear this, right? You know, the best of people are those that were at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And then those that come after, then those that come after. So you could ask this question, how could the Tabi'een do these things? How could the Tabi'een do this? Those that followed the Prophet, those that were in the generation after the Sahaba, how could they do these evil things? What did they do? They had love of wealth. Love of wealth. And another example of this happening was Uhud. So even the Sahaba had elements and people that had this factor in them. How did it happen in Uhud? The archers were on the mountain. They were ordered by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and by the messenger to stay there, stay put and protect the believers. But then they saw the spoils of war, the little wealth that was there being looted and left. Actually, it was being left alone. And they saw the disbelievers running away, leaving their wealth. And so they said, there's lots of wealth over there, and we're winning the battle. Let's just go and get those. And so that's what they did. It happened in Uhud. How did it happen in Balat al-Shuhada, in the battle of the courtyard of martyrs? It was the same thing. They actually have reached such depth into France. They were 100 kilometers or so from Paris, and they were in this very important battle, a decisive battle, with Charles Martel and his army. And they had so much wealth accumulated during their battles until they reached that point, that they said, you know what? Our wealth is being looted, we might as well just protect the wealth. And so that's what they did. Instead of protecting each other, instead of standing in their positions, instead of listening to their commander, they decided to protect the wealth that they had. That was love of wealth. When Uhud happened, this verse was revealed. And the verse talks about those that desire this world and those that desire the hereafter. And so we learn from this that we need to understand that when we desire this world, we will not attain much. But when we desire the hereafter, we will attain wonders. The verse says, مِنْكُمْ مَنْ يُرِيدُ الدُّنْيَا وَمِنْكُمْ مَنْ يُرِيدُ الْآخِرَةِ. Among you are some of you who desire this world, and among you are some who desire the hereafter. It's our choice which party we choose to attribute ourselves to. Arrogance and pride in numbers is another mistake that happened during the battle of the Shuhada, Balat al-Shuhada. And this happened somewhere else. It happened in Hunayn. So even the Sahaba did this. Not just the Tabi'een during the battle of Balat al-Shuhada, but even the Sahaba did it in Hunayn, where they were happy with the numbers that they had. They had this arrogance and pride and happiness in, wow, we are so much right now. They would say, لَن نُغْلَبَ الْيَوْمِ مِنْ قِلَّةٍ. We will not lose this battle for being small in numbers. We are large in numbers. We will not lose because of this. And so they attributed success not to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but to their numbers. And that arrogance and pride is something that the Sahaba did in Hunayn. The Tabi'een did it during Balat al-Shuhada. They had an army of 50,000, largest army ever in Europe by the Muslims at the time. And so they thought that they were so large they would never be defeated. And they were arrogant and proud. Racism. The Tabi'een were racist? At some points in time, some of them were. Yes. Did this happen during the time of the Sahaba? Yes, it did. Abu Dharr and Bilal have a very interesting story, where apparently Abu Dharr and Bilal, they're both Sahaba, radiallahu anhum. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept them and be pleased with them. They were both angry with each other at one point in time, and they had an argument. And so Abu Dharr kind of said to Bilal, Ibn Sawdan, O son of a black person, or a black woman. So he was as if mocking his race, as if being racist. And Bilal told the Prophet that this happened. He didn't respond, he didn't say, he didn't curse him back. He actually took this to the Prophet ﷺ. Why? Not because he's a whiny person, but because it is something that is unacceptable among the Sahaba, to have this element of racism. And the Prophet ﷺ says to Abu Dharr, إِنَّكَ امْرُؤٌ فِيكَ جَاهِلِيَّةٌ. You are a man with elements of ignorance. Elements of ignorance. From the days of Jahiliyyah, from the time before Islam, the days of ignorance. This is what the Prophet ﷺ said to Abu Dhar. Abu Dhar felt so guilty that he put his head on the ground and he asked Bilal to step on it, to step on his head. Can you imagine that happening today? Can you imagine anyone coming to you, cursing you, and then feeling bad about it, and putting their head on the ground and telling you, step on my head? Never would anyone do this. And so it shows us how much in his heart he understood his mistake, and how much he regretted it, and how much he was willing to humiliate himself, so much so to apologize for the major mistake that he made, that he understood how much he caused Bilal harm, that he was willing to pay for it. So the Sahaba did have elements of racism. It is something that the Prophet worked hard to remove. And the Tabi'een had it during the Malat al-Shuhada. How? The Berber would say, we are Berber. We are the original people that came into Al-Andalus with Tariq ibn Ziyad, who was also a Berber. We deserve more wealth from these spoils of war. And the Arabs would say, we are Arab. We are the original people of the Prophet ﷺ. We deserve more wealth than you. And so they forgot about the just division that the Prophet ﷺ had ordained to troops of spoils of war. They forgot about that. And they decided to get more of the division and transgress against each other based on their race. Another example during the time of the Sahaba is Al-Aws and Al-Khazraj, where at one point in time, Al-Aws and Al-Khazraj were two tribes in Medina. They were battling during the days of ignorance so much that the Prophet came and united them. Right? And there are verses in the Quran that talk about the brotherhood and love that Islam brought forth between believers. It is something unique to Islam. And so, Al-Aws and Al-Khazraj were at one point in time, during the time of the Prophet, they were angry with each other. And one of the Al-Aws tribe said, "Oh Aws, where are you?" And one of the Khazraj said, "Oh Khazraj, where are you?" And so they gathered around themselves and supported each other, and they were actually about to fight. And the Prophet knew about this. And the Prophet's face reddened with anger. And during the life of the Prophet, if you read the seerah, very few times that the Prophet's face would redden out of anger. Very few times. And so it's for us actually to pay heed, pay much attention to when that actually happens. Because it definitely is something very significant that would make the Prophet himself angry. Alayhi salatu wasalam. The Prophet is not known to be angry. During the time when he was in Mecca, they would mock him, and ridicule him, and call him Mudamman, which is the opposite of the meaning of Muhammad. And Muhammad means praiseworthy. Mudamman means not praiseworthy, or worthy of insult, worthy of ridicule. That's what they would call the Prophet ﷺ. Not for just a day or two, but for months and years. Imagine you were called that for months and years by your people, in your city. Can you stand that? Can you bear that? Or would you be angry? I know I would. But the Prophet wasn't. And he is reported to have said to his Sahaba, to his companions, he would say, "Why are you upset? They are cursing Mudhammam, but I am Muhammad." That's what he would tell them. And so alayhi salatu wasalam, he would never be angry for himself. He would only be angry when it's something related to Islam and the message and the vision and the understanding among the Sahaba. So very rare does he get angry. So when he does, we must pay attention to it. This is what he said. He said, "Is it the call of ignorance that you are calling amongst you right now? Is this the call of ignorance?" Because they were calling each other by their tribe. One would say, "Oh, Aws," and the people of Aws would come, and the other was saying, "Oh, Khazraj," and the people of Khazraj would come. And so he would say, "Is it the call of ignorance that you are calling while I'm amongst you? Leave it, for it stinks." An Arabic word that is not often used by the Prophet ﷺ. Very rarely you'd find it. Muntan. It stinks. This call of racism stinks. Another meaning that is derived from the word muntanna is the smell of a skunk. And if you've actually been driving at one point in time here in Canada, got the pleasant opportunity to smell the skunk, you would know how horrible a smell it is if you're close to it. And usually we're very far when we're driving from that smell. It stinks. Uqba ibn al-Hajjaj al-Saluli. So Balat al-Shuhada happened. The believers lost the battle to Charles Martel. They lost it. 50,000 troops were facing 400,000 troops. They couldn't win. They had all these elements of failure. Remember we talked about rules of success and rules of failure? Dear brothers and sisters, these are rules of failure. Love of wealth, arrogance and pride, racism. We will never succeed if we have these elements amongst us. And they did not. And they lost the battle. And so, they had to return. And it is said that their commander at the time, Abdurrahman al-Ghafiqi, died during this battle, passed away. He was martyred during this battle. He was the one that was uniting the Berber and the Arabs, telling them to forget all these nonsense, all these differences, and let's be united for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He died. He was the ruler of Al-Andalus, and he passed away in this battle. Meaning he was at the forefront. Uqba ibn al-Hajjaj al-Saluli was the next in line. He ruled from 116 to 123 Hijri. And he chose Al-Andalus. He was actually given the option by the Khalifa at the time to rule somewhere else. But he said, no, I want to rule in Al-Andalus. I want to be the governor of Al-Andalus. Why? It is said because he loved jihad so much that he understood that when he is going to be there, he's going to be leading the Muslim army. He's going to be continuing the steps of those that were before him. And he led more than 7 military campaigns in France. More than 7 military campaigns in France. Some of them were won, some of them were lost. He used to teach the prisoners of war about Islam. He used to teach them about Islam. Not torture them, not persecute them. He would teach them about Islam. It is said that 2,000 prisoners embraced Islam at his hands. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed this beautiful verse that we know of. That Allah guides with you one person is better for you than the red she-camel in blessings. And for the Arabs at the time, the red she-camel is one that is very much the most expensive camel that you can think of. Humur al-Ni'am. It is the best of blessings to the Arabs. For us, you can compare it to the loftiest of palaces, to the best of cars, Mercedes or BMW or whatever you like. That you be the person that guides someone to Islam, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides that person through you. This is a blessing beyond blessing. And 2,000 people embraced Islam at the hands of Uqba ibn al-Hajjaj al-Saluli. He was martyred in one of the battles, and he passed away. And this ends, it actually ends the first era of governance. Remember we said there were 2 eras of governance. One where people were more focused on jihad, and the second, unfortunately, was focused on corruption and wealth. The era of governors, part 2. The second phase of governors is from the year 123 Hijri to 138 Hijri. It's 15 years. 15 years. The total time of the era of governors, according to historians, is 42 years. And so 15 years, the last 15 years, is known as the second era of governors. The seeds of corruption that spread during this era came from Balat al-Shuhada, came from the battle of Balat al-Shuhada. So the love of wealth, the racism, the arrogance and the pride, all of those seeds spread forth and grew during this era. Extreme wealth. So the Muslims found themselves very wealthy during this time. And this is a very interesting hadith that we shared last time, where the Prophet ﷺ says that, by Allah, I do not fear for you from poverty. I do not fear for you from poverty. But I fear for you that the world would extend itself to you, just like those before you. Then you would compete for it. You would compete not for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but for the wealth of this world that has extended its arms to you. And it would destroy you as it did the people before you. And so this is really what happened to the Muslims in Spain during this era, the era of governors. And they had racial divides. Arab versus Berber is one racial divide. Even among Arabs, there were racial divides. There was the Madri, the Hijazi, the Adnani, the Qahtani, the Fihri. All these different tribes. Even the Amawi. Different tribes that are all Arab, but they would have this racial divides among themselves. You'd find the Qahtanis together, the Fihris together, and the Amawis together, and they would say, we are more rightful to rule. And so they would plot against the rulers, trying to overthrow that ruler. They would get the rulership for some time, maybe a few months, and then someone else would plot against them, and they would lose the governor again. And so this was the era of governors, where there were so many plots by so many people. If you actually listen to the details of this era, it's very sad indeed, how the Muslims used to kill each other and fight against each other and plot against each other, all for the sake of power and wealth. Qaisi is also one tribe. It was a time of injustice. One example is Abdul Malik ibn Qutb. He divided people based on tribe and ethnicity. He actually did something that is perhaps known today as racial profiling. He wanted people to be known as from this race as opposed to that race. He divided them based on that. He discriminated against non-Madri. So he is from the Madri tribe. Anyone that's non-Madri was discriminated against. Yusuf ibn Abdul Rahman al-Fihri is another governor that ruled during this time and caused immense injustice. He is from the Fihri tribe. He ruled from 130 to 138. For 8 years, this man was able to rule. And so it gives us an indication that he's not just like any other governor that ruled for a year or so and then was overthrown. This individual actually ruled for 8 years. For 8 years. And he spread so much injustice that one of the major things he did is that he separated Al-Andalus from Al-Khilafah Al-Amawiyyah. From Al-Khilafah Al-Amawiyyah, from the Umayyad Khilafah. He said, you know what? We're going to be our own state. We'll have our own rules. We won't be abiding by any of your rules. We are separate. And so, this is what he did. One of the major things that Yusuf ibn Abdul Rahman al-Fihri did. He caused more than 30 divisions. Imagine, 30 tribes and ethnicities were all separated and divided amongst themselves in Al-Andalus. The different tribes that we mentioned in the previous slide, they were all there. They had their leader, and they never paid any kind of tribute to this leader. But he kept them divided. He kind of used a very interesting thing, a concept in military conquests known as divide and conquer. The very same concept used by the colonial powers. They divided and conquered. Right? They divided Aljazair to Aljazair, Egypt to Egypt, Saudi Arabia to Saudi Arabia, Mauritania to Mauritania. All the Arab countries were divided among themselves. They said, you know what? Spain, you take this area. Italy, you take that. France, take this. Britain, I'll take that. And all that. And that's how they divided us. And that's how they conquered us for many years. Likewise, Yusuf ibn Abdul Rahman al-Fihri divided and conquered. There was no more jihad. No more jihad. Jihad ended with Balat al-Shuhada. Few military campaigns after, led by Uqba, the last governor during the first era of governors. But during the second era of governors, there was no jihad. Why? Because they were focused on power and wealth and rule, and they were divided among themselves. They no longer followed the known policy or understanding that unity is strength, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses unity. And those that are united. They forgot about that. They no longer cared about jihad. They were worried about the power that they wanted to attain. This is what happens when dunya fills the hearts. They left the pocket of Visigoths to grow. The Visigoths are the Christian tribes that were living in Al-Andalus. Some of the noble elites amongst them fled to Pelona. They grew there. And the ruling governors, during the era of governors, the second era of governors, they left it there. They allowed them to grow. As a result, all of southwest France was lost, except Septimania. So remember we talked about how Islam entered into France all the way very close to Paris. All of that was lost, except for a region called Septimania in southern France. The kingdom of Leon was formed in the rock of Pelone. So Pelona, the region in the north of Al-Andalus, became known as the kingdom of Leon. In the next, inshallah, session, Brother Sharif will talk about the kingdom of Leon and the different kings that came and what they did to harm the rulership of Al-Andalus and the Muslims in Al-Andalus. Another thing that happened during the era of governors is that the Al-Andalus was separated from Al-Khilafah, divided into nearly 30 groups, each seeking wealth and power. The Khawarij. We'll talk about the Khawarij in detail, inshallah. The decline of the Umayyad Khilafah and the rise of the Abbasid Khilafah. So one of the reasons why the Al-Andalus decided to separate itself from Al-Khilafah Al-Umayyah was because its last few years was also filled with immense corruption. The last years of Al-Khilafah Al-Umayyah was filled with corruption. The Umayyad Caliphate at the end was filled with corruption. They themselves were mostly in tune with nothing else except this dunya, enjoying this dunya. And so, rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when this happens, they are bound to change. They are bound to lose authority. They are bound to lose and not be among the successful. And so Al-Khilafah Al-Abbasiyya happened and it was established. This happened in the year 132 Hijri. Who are the Khawarij is a very interesting question. We'll talk about that in detail, inshallah, in a few minutes. Chapter 4 is about the Enter, inshallah. This is the longest chapter today. The Enter happened, and he was a miracle. His name is Abdurrahman ibn Muawiyah ibn Hisham ibn Abdul Malik. He was an Amawi, meaning that he is from the Umayyad people, the Umayyad dynasty. He's actually one of the nephews or grandson actually of the Khalifa, the last Khalifa. And so he arrives in Al-Andalus in the year 138 Hijri. And remember we said that Yusuf was the governor of Al-Andalus from the year 132 to 138. Was it 130 or 132? 130. 130 to 138 Hijri. So Abdurrahman arrives, Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, as he's known in history, the Enterer. He brought with him a new methodology, a new way of thinking, not of divide and conquer, but of unite. It was a new beginning to Al-Andalus. It turned Al-Andalus upside down. It turned things completely. Scholars of history say that in the year 138 Hijri, Al-Andalus was so divided that it was on the verge of being lost. It was so close to being lost. The rulers of Al-Andalus were so much caring about wealth and enjoying the pleasures of this world, and power and authority and injustice was spread out, and divisions was all over, that they were about to lose Al-Andalus. Right? The Sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that this is bound to happen. And so they were going to lose it. Except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent this miracle, Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, to turn things upside down. Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, we'll talk about him a bit. Who is he? Known as Abdurrahman ibn Muawiyah, he actually, during the fall of the Umayyad Khilafah in 132 Hijri, he was the grandson of the Khalifa. He was 19 at the time. And he was in a town in Iraq. And he was there, living, and he was actually sick. The story says that he was actually sick at the time. He was at home, and he wasn't, talking to anyone or anyone was seeing him. But his son came to him crying. And he tried, at a distance to calm his son down, but his son would not stop crying. And so he came to know that there are black flags in his town. Black flags raised in his town. And it was known that Al-Abbasid, the people that came to rule and became the Khulafa, Al-Abbasiyin, they came with black flags whenever they were going to implement capital punishment on those that were from the Umayyad clan. And he was an Umayyad, he was from the Umayyad clan, and so he naturally feared for himself. And so he fled from Iraq, he left his family, left his son, left everything. And he fled with his brother who was 13 years old. His brother was Al-Walid. They fled from Al-Iraq. Treachery and murder. And this is a very sad story actually. And so it is said that he was fleeing. He was actually running away, and they reached a river. And they were crossing that river. They were swimming in that river. Him, Abdurrahman, and his brother Al-Walid. And they were swimming. And then Al-Abbasid troops that were there, that had the black flags, they called to them. They said, come back, and we will give you, asylum. We will not kill you. We will give you asylum. And so Al-Walid said, I will return. He was tired. He couldn't swim any further. He said, I'll go back. And Abdurrahman said, no, don't go. So Al-Walid went back. And Al-Walid went back, and he was immediately killed by the troops. He was murdered right then and there before the eyes of Abdurrahman. And so Abdurrahman witnessed the death, the murder of his brother, who was only 13 years old. And he continued swimming. He reached Qayrawan, which was in Tunis. And there, he was actually half Berber, and so his mother was a Berber. And so he had some kind of connection with the people over there. He was able to find refuge there. They were Berber as well. And then, very interestingly, let's show you actually Qayrawan. So this is Tunis, close up. And right there is Qayrawan. He was there, all the way from Iraq. Al-Khawarij were ruling Al-Qayrawan at the time. Al-Khawarij, that time they were led by Abdurrahman ibn Habib, and he was ruling the area of West Africa, including Morocco and Tunis. Abdurrahman ibn Habib was ruling that area. He was from Al-Khawarij, and they were ruling that region. They hated the Umayyads, they hated the Umayyads, and so he actually had to keep his identity secret. He didn't tell anyone that he was from the Umayyad clan. And interestingly, let's talk about the history of Al-Khawarij. Who are the Khawarij and how did they happen? What happened? Briefly, because the story of Al-Khawarij is a very long story. But briefly, in the Battle of Siffin, which was a very sad battle that happened during the second fitna of the believers. The second fitna of the believers. Scholars of history say that the first fitna happened when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, and many of the believers, many of the believing tribes said, we will not pay zakat, and we will not be, under the fold of this Khalifa. And many people came up and said, I'm the new Prophet, etc., etc. It's known as the first fitna. The second fitna is actually said to have happened during the time of Uthman ibn Affan. Continued all the way to the time of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Uthman ibn Affan was murdered by Muslims. And the story is a very deep story. It's a fitna. It's kind of like a civil war that happened to the believers. A very sad story. And it's one that I encourage everyone to look into, especially from reputable sources. It is, of course, food for poison by Orientalists. And anyone that wishes to smear Islam and attack Islam uses that region, that area, that time to attack Islam. But if you look at pure and good sources of history, you will find the true story, and you definitely have to tackle it. definitely have to understand it and definitely have to reflect upon it. And perhaps this is a topic of series to come, inshallah. But Siffin was one of the battles that was held between Muslims. It was between Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan and Ali ibn Abi Talib. Muawiyah was calling for justice. He wanted those that killed Uthman to be brought forth to justice. And Ali was the Khalifa at the time. He wanted to bring peace and security to the land. And so the two fought. But then, at the end, they reconciled. They reconciled. And they agreed to terms. And the battle was stopped. They agreed to terms and the battle was stopped. In the army of Ali ibn Abi Talib, there were people that did not like this reconciliation. They were known as Al-Khawarij. Al-Khawarij means those that left. They left the army of Ali ibn Abi Talib. They hated the fact that Ali reconciled with Muawiyah. They considered this treachery, and so they left. They were known as the extremists of the time. The extremists of the time. And so, Al-Khawarij continued to kind of live in seclusion since then. They consider themselves the only true believers. Everyone else is not really a true believer. In fact, they would say that everyone else is actually a disbeliever. We're the only true believers. And they allowed themselves this right to judge others' belief. Of course, this is a very simplistic explanation of what the Khawarij were and how they were. And again, I encourage you, inshallah, to go in depth into it. Abdurrahman ibn Muawiyah had to suffer because the Khawarij were ruling in al-Maghrib. And he fled capture. They were actually about to capture him. He fled to a place known as Burqa. It was in Libya. So he fled to Libya, and he kept his identity secret, and he lived there for some time. He was wanted, he was a fugitive. He was wanted by both Al-Khawarij and by the Abbasid Khilafah, who were not reconciled with each other. They were also enemies. But he was wanted by both. And so he fled and he lived there for a few years. At the age of 23, so he lived 4 or 5 years there, and now he's 23 years old, he makes a decision not to live in seclusion anymore, not to live as a fugitive anymore, not to live in secrecy anymore, but to take action. That's the decision that he made at the age of 23. And so, he decides to go to Al-Andalus. It's a region where he's not wanted. No one in Al-Andalus wants him. And it's a region that is full of civil strife. Remember the 30 divisions that we talked about? He had a vision for Al-Andalus. He said that he can bring Al-Andalus to unite. And that is what he did. And that is what he worked on. He planned. And before he went to Al-Andalus, he was preparing for this. What did he do? He actually, in the year 136 Hijri, so 2 years before he went to Al-Andalus, he sent his most trusted friend, his slave and his servant, Badr. He sent Badr to Al-Andalus. Badr goes to Al-Andalus and he talks first to all of the Umayyad clans and the Umayyad people that are there. They're from the same tribe, they understand him, they know about him. He's from a very noble lineage, the grandson of the Khalifa. And so Badr talks to them and says that my lord or my master is actually saying that, let's support. I want your support. I need your support. I'm going to come. And then he goes to the Barbar. And he tells them, "Oh Barbar, my master, Abdurrahman, is actually half Barbar. He's from you. He's a Barbar like you. He needs your support." But Badr does not just limit himself to that. And, these are all at the commands of and the instructions of Abdurrahman al-Dakhil. He actually goes not just to those, he sends to all of the fled Umayyads, all of the fled Umayyads, who are fled in different parts of the world at the time. He sends to them and tells them, "Come to Al-Andalus." And then he travels to Al-Andalus. In the year 138, he travels secretly, and he's met with Badr at the shore. And so he crosses the shore, He is on a ship, secretly. No one knows that he is Abdurrahman, who is the grandson of the Khalifa, the past Khalifa. No one knows this. He reaches Al-Andalus secretly. He meets Badr secretly. And they go to Qurtuba. There, he marches troops. He gathers them. And he gathers allies. All types of allies. He calls on all the different tribes. He tells them to come. One of the leaders that he actually contacts and makes some kind of an agreement with is this man, Abu Sabbah al-Yahsabi, who was the leader of the Yemeni Qahtani tribe, and he was in Sevilla. He was in Sevilla. And so, we have two prizes here, and I want to perhaps give one of those prizes for this question. What is the Arabic name of Sevilla? Ishbiliya. I can't give you the prize yet. You didn't raise your hand. No chance for anyone. Next time, inshallah. But no, we'll give him the prize, inshallah. Omar, if I ask you to give him the box, inshallah.
I'm going to come here every Friday. Thank you.
Jazakumullah khairan. Ishbiliya is the name of the city in Arabic. And Ishbiliya was ruled by Abu Sabbah al-Yahsabi, the leader of the Yemeni Qahtani tribe. And he contacts him and he agrees with him and they agree to support him. And then a battle happens, known as Al-Masarra. This battle was between Yusuf ibn Abdurrahman al-Fihri, who was the governor of Al-Andalus, who was perhaps a pseudo-governor because really he didn't rule much, he was just the name of a governor. But the different tribes were ruling the regions that they were in. One example is the Qahtanis leading and ruling Ishbiliya. But he said to him, and he told him, that I am the descendant of the Khalifa, and I am the rightful ruler of Al-Andalus, and I want to bring everyone in the fold of unity and end the injustice and tyranny that you are causing. He tells him this. And he refuses to respond, of course. Yusuf dismisses Abdurrahman al-Dakhil. And Muslim swords meet again. Muslim swords meet again. They don't meet the non-Muslim Christian army. They don't meet the Visigoths or the Romans. They don't meet except Muslim swords. And it's a very sad thing to happen. Very sad thing to happen. Why? Because rebellions were happening in the multiple, so much. Multiple rebellions. All the time a group would try to rebel. Divisions. 30 groups were divided and attacking each other and killing each other. Wreaking havoc. Causing insecurity. The only solution was for Muslim swords to meet. The only solution was to root out this unjust, tyrannical ruler and bring about a just governorship. And Abdurrahman al-Dakhil wanted to do this. The stallion and the mule. A very interesting story that happened. And I'll ask you this question, and Akhi, please do not answer this question, inshallah. The question is, the question is, who in the history of Islam is known to have ridden on a mule?
Umar al-Khattab?
Umar al-Khattab, Jazakallahu khairan ya Umar. That's not the prize question. That's no prize this time. Umar al-Khattab is known to have actually ridden on a mule. And here a very interesting story happened. It is said that Abdurrahman had a stallion. And it is said that the people of Qahtan, the Qahtani tribe, were actually kind of a bit envious of this man. And they said, you know what, we are fighting this battle. Most of Abdurrahman al-Dakhil's troops are from the Yemeni Qahtani tribe. Some were Berber, some were Umayyad, but there were very few in number. Most of them were actually the Yemeni Qahtani Arabs. And, he can, at any point in time, if we lose the battle, he can actually flee with his stallion, a very strong horse. He can just get on his strong horse and flee the battle scene, and we won't see him again. So this rumor, this idea, was spreading among the camp of the Qahtani tribe. Abdurrahman hears this. Abdurrahman ibn Muawiyah hears this. And immediately he goes to the leader of the Qahtani tribe. Does anyone remember his name?
Yeah.
Other than you.
One dance.
Yeah. Anyone remember the leader of the Qahtani tribe's name? Al-Yahsubi. Jazakallahu khairan. And so, he goes to Abu Sabbah al-Yahsubi and tells him, Ya Abu Sabbah, I would like to give you my stallion as a gift. And so he gives his stallion to Abu Sabbah as a gift. And he says, in return, if you find a mule that you have that I could ride, that would be great. And so Abu Sabbah gives him the mule, and that's what he does. He rides on the mule for the rest of the battle. And this is something that he does out of his wisdom, even though he's perhaps 23, 24 years old, very young, to rid the Muslim army from any evil and negative thoughts, and to make them and keep them focused on the goal, and to keep them united. And Masala ends with a victorious side, and the victorious side is the side of Abdurrahman al-Dafi. Yusuf ibn Abdurrahman al-Fihri loses. There were no escapees, either killed or imprisoned. No. But yes, that was the rule of war at the time. No escapees. No one can actually flee the battle scene and run away. Why? Because they can actually form the army and turn around or come back the next day or come back the third day. So the rule of war at the time was that there were to be no escapees. No one is allowed to escape. You're either killed in the battle or you're imprisoned. Either this or that. That was the general rule. But in this battle, something unique happened. That was not the response that Abdurrahman ibn Muawiyah had. When they saw the troops of Yusuf ibn Abdurrahman al-Fihri running away, when they were fleeing the battle scene, the Qahtanis, the Berbers, the Umayyads, all of his troops were actually about to attack them and kill them and hold them and ransom them and take them as hostages. He told them to stop. He said to them, do not follow them. Leave them. And then he gave a pearl of wisdom which echoes till this day. He says, do not destroy enemies that you wish to gain as friends. Do not destroy enemies that in the future you wish to gain as friends. And keep them for those with more animosity. Keep your strength, he means. Keep your anger with those, or for those, with more animosity. Who is he referring to here? More animosity, yes. The Christians, Jazakallahu khair. Because he understood, Abdurrahman al-Dakhil understood the true threat that threatens Al-Andalus is from the Visigoths that are gaining power in the north. It is from Charles Martel and his descendants in France. It is from the European powers that wish to regain Al-Andalus and capture all of its wealth. He understood this. And so he told his people, he told his troops, leave the army and the troop of Yusuf ibn Abdurrahman al-Fihri. We want to gain them as friends in the future. Do not destroy them. Keep the strength for those that are more animosity, have more animosity towards you. Leaving the enemies causes no animosity in the heart. This is something that is unique. He understood that even the divisions that happened in Al-Andalus was a fitna. It was a fitna caused by wealth, by power, by greed. It was a fitna. He understood this. He understood this fitna. He had no animosity in his heart towards those that were actually attempting to kill him just a few minutes ago. He said, leave them. He understood the true enemy. True enemy are not these people that are attacking us right now or fleeing after the battle. This is not the true enemy. And also he had a fiqhi perspective, which is very important for us to understand. Fight these Muslims to attain unity. So Sharia permits this. We can fight the Muslims that cause division, that cause corruption. And he wanted to fight them. And he did. But there's a difference between a mushrik and a baghi. And so, a mushrik is a disbeliever that attacks you not only to destroy you and spread mischief and spread corruption, but also to spread disbelief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A baghi, on the other hand, is defined as someone that is Muslim, he believes in Allah, but is fighting you for different reasons, ulterior reasons, whether it is love for power, love for wealth, love for this or love for that. In fiqh, the both are not the same. You don't treat them the same. And so while in the battlefield you actually are not allowed in Islam to leave, at the time at least, the ruling and the understanding of war was not to leave anyone to escape that was a disbeliever. Because they would spread disbelief. They would spread disbelief wherever they go. They're the troops, they're the army, they're the ones that were fighting against you. You have every right to destroy them. But you leave those that are believers, because they can return much easier back to the true path and they can become friends. That was just a brief highlight from the understanding of Abdurrahman ad-Dakhil. Betrayal. Abu Sabbah al-Yahsubi, or Yahsubi, attempted to actually kill Abdurrahman ad-Dakhil. And so now the battle is won. Now Al-Andalus is kind of in the hands of Abdurrahman ad-Dakhil. Now Abu Sabbah actually wants that position. So he betrays Abdurrahman ibn Muawiyah. He says to his troops, let's kill Abdurrahman. And they actually refuse. The troops say, we shouldn't do this. He's a man of wisdom. He is a man that actually has gathered so many of us that are different and united us. Abdurrahman finds out about this. But he does not attack Abu Sabbah. He does not throw him in prison. He keeps him. But he keeps it in his heart and keeps it in his mind that this is a man that has betrayed him. This is a ruler that cannot be trusted. And so 11 years down the road, he removes him from governing Ashbili. He also is a very pragmatic leader, Abdurrahman ad-Dakhil. He understands that you cannot remove As-Sabbah because he is actually the leader, and even if his troops and his people refused to obey him this time, they still respect him and venerate him. He's the leader of the Qahtani tribe, which is a large tribe, a large contingency in his army. He could not alienate him right now, but he keeps it in his mind. Very tactful and wise leader is Abdurrahman ad-Dakhil. He's known as the Emperor because in 138 Hijri to 172 Hijri, he ruled. For 34 years, he ruled Al-Andalus. And he faced 25 rebellions. 25 rebellions. 25 rebellious attempts against him. These were rebellions that were continuing at his time, but he was able to thwart, he was able to win against each and every one. And there were so different types of rebellions, and they saddened our heart to see how the Muslims were so much attached to this world that they would fight unity, they would fight just to gain power and to gain wealth. 34 years was the ruling time of Abdurrahman ad-Dakhil. He stabilized Al-Andalus despite his 25 rebellions in 34 years. Imagine, divide the 25 by 34, that means every year and a half or so there's a rebellion. And a rebellion means that he would have to leave the army, take the army, spend so much resources to fight against that rebellion. And so many of the efforts, many of the plans that he had for Al-Andalus were thwarted as well. He could not have those plans. He was too much focused on fighting these rebellions. However, on the good side, he was actually able to stabilize Al-Andalus. How? He thwarted the 25 rebellions. The governor that came after him did not face 25 rebellions because the 25 rebellions already happened and they already lost and they already are put in place. And so he kind of stabilized Al-Andalus, and it is said that the rulers that came after Abdurrahman ad-Dakhil found time and effort that they could put into making Al-Andalus a better place. The Abbasid attempt. And so remember, Al-Andalus is ruled by Abdurrahman ad-Dakhil, who is an Amawi. And the Khilafah al-Abbasiyya was able to win against the Khawarij. And they actually now rule all of the Muslim world except for Al-Andalus. Andalus was the only part that was not under the Khilafah at the time. So they attempt to get it back. There was an Abbasid rebellion. A rebellion that was done, one of those 25 rebellions, was instigated and pushed forth by the Abbasid Khilafah. It was done in 146 Hijri. It is said that Al-Ala al-Mughith al-Hadrami was sent by the Khalifa at the time, who was Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, a very known Khalifa. He sent this man to instigate, to call people to the Khilafah, and to return Al-Andalus to the Khilafah. And this man went to Al-Andalus again with a black flag. And so the black flag brings memories to whom? Abd al-Rahman al-Dakhi. This attempt caused another battle, smaller one, a very small battle. And a very interesting story, albeit an untrue one, that is found in some unauthentic history books, is that Abd al-Rahman al-Dakhi won the battle so much so that the heads of all of those that were supporting the Khilafah al-Abbasiyya was cut off, put in boxes, and sent to the Khalifa. The Khalifa was performing Hajj, he was in Medina, and it is said that troops or people from Al-Andalus came secretly they were actually in Mecca at the time, not in Medina, they were in Mecca performing Hajj. And after Hajj, they found boxes all over the city, all over Mecca, with heads of the people that were sent to Al-Andalus. Sad story, a horrible story actually. It is said that the Khalifa, Abu Ja'far Mansur, finds the head of the man that he sent. What was his name? Abu al-Ala. He finds the head and he says, "We killed this poor man. We do not have a chance with that lad." The lad being Abdurrahman al-Dakhi, Abdurrahman al-Mu'awiyah. And he says, "Alhamdulillah for having the sea between us and him." This saying is actually authentic, but the story around it is not very authentic. And so it's perhaps mostly legend that exists in some storybooks and some history books that are not very authentic. I thought I'd share that story anyway, but it shows you that the Khalifa, Abu Ja'far Mansur, decided not to attack, not to try to bring the area of Al-Andalus, the region of Al-Andalus, the state of Al-Andalus, which is independent now under the fold of the Khilafah. Very interesting question that we perhaps, and I had this question in my heart, is why be separate from the Khilafah? Why not unite all the Muslims under one Khilafah? Why not give Al-Andalus to the Khilafah al-Abbasiyya, to the Abbasid Khilafah, Abbasid Caliphate? Why fight against them? In our hearts, it's very hard to reconcile the reality of what happened with our understanding of how Islam and how united we should be under the fold of the Khilafah. It's very hard to reconcile this. But to answer the question, we have to analyze the situation fairly. And so Abdurrahman the Emperor versus the Abbasids. A very interesting comparison here will be done briefly before we conclude today's session, inshallah. Transgression against the innocent. Remember Al-Walid? Al-Walid was just one example. He was the brother of Abdurrahman ibn Muawiyah. 13 years old, killed in cold blood. No trial, no defense, no discussion, just because he is a descendant of the Khalifa, the previous Khalifa. And so, understanding fitna. It was a fitna at the time. The Abbasid Khilafat, the Khalifa at the time that came, first Abbasid Khalifa and the people that came after him, the troops, and the people that came to rule and become the Khulafat, they did not understand this. It was a fitna. But they did not deal with it wisely. They had the animosity in their hearts against the Umayyad.
They feared that any of the descendants of the Khulafa would come and say that I am the rightful Khalifa, and so they wanted to kill all of the descendants. The only people they did not kill were the children and the women. But any man of age, and so Walid was one of them, would be killed. They did not understand fitna. Removing animosity. They did not attempt to remove animosity by reconciling with them, by using their skills, by befriending them, by putting aside differences. They wanted to remove animosity by uprooting it, by just killing them. Because they understood the Umayyads would have animosity against the Abbasids. But they wanted to remove it by killing it, by the easy way, so to say. It's the easier way. Contrast that with Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, when he actually ordered his troops after al-Masarra not to attack those that were fleeing. He understood the fitna, that this division was happening in Al-Andalus. He understood it. He also did not want to transgress against any of the innocents. He didn't go after anyone's tribes or anyone that was against them and kill the people that were supporting those leaders. He also wanted to remove the animosity, not by killing those that were fleeing or killing the different tribes, but by befriending them, by making use of their skills. He could have been, Dr. Raghab al-Sujani comments on this, he says that Abdurrahman al-Dakhil could have been attracted to the Khalifa, could have been given governorship over a region. His skills, his wisdom, which were proven over 42 years of ruling Al-Andalus, could have been used for the Khalifa. But one mistake, one major mistake, one major injustice caused for this not to happen. And that was the murder of his brother in front of his own eyes and the attempt to murder him. They could have used his skill sets, but they did not. This is the last slide for today, inshallah. And the question that will come, and we'll try to answer, inshallah, are these questions. What happened to Abdurrahman the Enter? And you will see a sad change that happens to Abdurrahman. Abdurrahman entered Al-Andalus with heart full of hope to unite all of the believers. And he did attempt that many times. But 25 rebellions change a person. When you're faced with 25 rebellions, you are bound to change. And we will see, how did Abdurrahman al-Dakhil change? How did he stop the 25 rebellions? Why did they rebel? Is a question that we will answer, inshallah, next time. Where is the morality in fighting your people that want you out of government? 25 rebellions, attempts to root him, to get him out of government. How is that moral? How is that something good? We'll touch upon that, inshallah, next time. What happened to the Muslims in Spain is a question that we always ask. And after Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, who was the governor? And what did he do in Al-Andalus? Those are the questions, inshallah, that we will try, inshallah, to answer next time. With that, conclude, inshallah, this session. Jazakumullah khair for listening, for being here, inshallah. And I'll leave the mic with Haytham, inshallah, and he can perhaps entertain questions, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Kullu qawli hadha astaghfirullah lakum astaghfiruh. Anything good I may have said is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Anything evil is from me, my nafs, my hawa, and my shaitan. I ask you to forgive me for it, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive me for it as well. Jazakumullah khair.